Hello, my name is Filip Tvrdý, and this is an introductory lecture to my course Philosophy of Language. This course is not aimed to the students of philosophy, but it's for non-philosophers, usually the students from the Department of English and American Studies. You probably wonder why you should know anything about philosophy at all. And I understand that philosophy is usually quite unpopular and that a lot of people make fun of it. First of all, I want to explain that I know all the jokes on philosophy, or I think that I know all of them, and I usually laugh at them and I enjoy them. For example, this one is my favorite. It's by Woody Allen, who wrote in 1969 this: I remember my reaction to a typically luminous observation of Kierkegaard's. Such a relation which relates itself to its own self, that is to say a self, must either have constituted itself or have been constituted by another. The concept brought tears to my eyes. My word, I thought, how clever! True, the passage was totally incomprehensible to me, but what of it as long as Kierkegaard was having fun? I understand why this passage is funny, and I completely agree. I hate philosophy that is incomprehensible, and I would like to express myself in simple and understandable phrases. And if you do not understand what I say, you should know upfront that it's my fault. My teacher from the Department of English and American Studies in Olomouc, Josef Jarab, who is some kind of guru among researchers in English and American studies, said in 19th this: all linguists are philosophers, but not all philosophers are linguists. And I must say that I enjoy this thought quite a lot. First of all, it's because philosophers are a much wider set of entities than linguists are. But to be more serious, I really think that to understand how language works, you should know at least some part of philosophy, especially philosophy of language. This is because linguistics is based on philosophical foundations. For example, semiotics was invented by Charles Sanders Peirce, an American philosopher, a member of pragmatist movement. A bit later, semantics was invented by German philosopher, mathematician and logician Gottlob Frege. And pragmatics was invented by Ludwig Wittgenstein and other philosophers in the second half of the 20th century. Philosophy of language deals with the most general and interesting questions, and I believe that all reasonable people at least sometimes think of them. These questions, these persistent questions are, for example, how does language work? Or what is the meaning of words and sentences? Is language innate or learned? What is the relation between thinking and speaking? And this is exactly what I want to deal with in this course. Philosophy in the 20th century is quite complicated because it is divided into two separate traditions. We can call these traditions continental and analytic philosophy. You probably know at least something about continental philosophy that was and is popular mainly in Germany and France. And this is, for example, phenomenology, structuralism, Marxism, existentialism, hermeneutics, neo-scholasticism, postmodernism, and so on and so on. This philosophy is popular in Europe mainly, but it spread it to other parts of the world. I will be talking only about analytic philosophy that originated in Austria and Germany, but that is highly popular mainly in Great Britain and the United States. But you can find researchers in analytic philosophy all over the world. The beginning of analytic philosophy is connected to the origin of modern logic that began in the end of the 19th century. Sometimes this event is called linguistic turn, and it is very important for the history of philosophy because in this linguistic turn, philosophers started to be more interested in language than in the world itself. They believed that analyzing language might be very fruitful for understanding how the world is. I'm going to talk about three phases of analytic philosophy that are called the ideal language philosophy. Then I'm going to talk about ordinary language philosophy, and in the end of my lectures about contemporary philosophy of language. Let's start with ideal language philosophy. Its centers were Vienna and Cambridge, and I would say that it began in, let's say, 1910 and ended in 1940. The main characteristics of ideal language philosophy is that philosophers tried to overcome defects of natural languages, for example, homonymy and synonymy and vagueness. And they usually try to do it through the construction of an ideal language. They tried to develop unambiguous lexical stock and logical syntax, and this led to the invention of semiotics, semantics, and logical syntax. The second phase is usually called ordinary language philosophy, and its centers were Oxford and Harvard. The aim of ordinary language philosophers was analyzing structure and function of natural languages using means of modern logic, and this led to the invention of pragmatics. In this second phase, philosophers lost their interest in creating ideal language and then wanted to understand what we already have, our mother tongues. As I said, in the end of this online course, I'm going to talk about contemporary philosophy with centers in many places of the world like Massachusetts Institute of Technology or Berkeley or many others. Philosophy at that time started with interdisciplinary cooperation with, for example, linguistics and computer science and cognitive psychology, evolution biology, and so on. In the end, I'm going to talk about some interesting hypotheses about the origin of language and about its universality. This is the plan for my first three lectures on ideal language philosophy. I'm going to talk about theory of reference by Charles Sanders Peirce and Gottlob Frege. Then I'm going to move to the so-called theory of descriptions with authors like Bertrand Russell or Peter Strawson. And in the end of this part, I want to present picture theory of language by Ludwig Wittgenstein that was used by many other philosophers, for example by Rudolf Carnap. In the second phase of this course, I'm going to present three lectures again on ordinary language philosophy, and I want to cover three important topics. I will start with language games, again by Ludwig Wittgenstein, and then I'm going to move to speech acts. This is the theory created by John Austin, John Searle, and many others. And I want to present two lectures on radical translation and radical interpretation by two famous American philosophers, Willard van Orman Quine and his student Donald Davidson. In the last part of this online course, I would like to present some issues of contemporary philosophy of language that I find the most interesting ones. It means that I'm going to talk about the connection between artificial intelligence and philosophy of language. This connection we can see in works of famous philosophers as Alan Turing and John Searle. And in the end, I'd like to talk about Noam Chomsky, probably the most famous linguist and philosopher of language of our era. I would like to show you Chomsky's ideas on universal grammar and the emergence of language, but I want to approach this topic a bit critically because I would like to show you also the ideas of Chomsky's opponents, for example, Daniel Everett and Steven Pinker. I hope that you are going to find this course interesting. So this is the end. See you next time.